Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. Thank you for tuning in to GNG LinkedIn Live, Gail and Gurpreet's LinkedIn segment. Yes, we weren't on last week, but we're back. And today we have a great topic. It's actually a topic that Gail wrote about last week. It's around candidate experience during the interview process. I know we've touched on candidate experience before, but we want to now just focus on the actual interview process, not the before and or the after, but actually candidate experience during each step of the interview process from first round to second round and third round. And then we also wanted to kind of touch on some of the things I wrote about was kind of like making candidates jump through hoops. Like I've seen some bad behaviors with managers or whoever's interviewing. They're running late and then a candidate's just sitting in the lobby for 30 minutes to an hour. That's not a good candidate experience. Candidates' time is valuable. So I've seen where people expect the candidate to bring a resume, and if they don't, then that's your limiting way to limit the candidate out, to rule the candidate out, which I've always found that process very ridiculous, because you have the candidate's resume, printed. I always made sure that my hiring managers always had the candidate's resume printed. I printed it for them. And Gail touched on how he was interviewing a candidate. The candidate didn't want he was employed. He didn't want his current employer to know he's looking for a job. So Gail actually took the step further and told the candidate that he didn't need to come fully dressed with a business suit and all that stuff, because that will alarm his current employer. And you don't want that, right? I've made accommodations around individuals who are currently working. I've done interviews after hours, just to accommodate candidates who are working, right? Because you don't want your employer to know, because that will create its own obstacles. So let's dive deep right into this topic about why is it so important now more than ever to be focusing on building a great candidate experience during each phase of the interview, regardless it's first round, second round, or third round. And what we're going to go into some of the things that we've seen over the years, and some of the best practices that we recommend, and some of the things you shouldn't be doing. So as always, Gail, let's start the discussion with you.
So I'm going to start it off just the same way I think I started off with the candidate experience. Why is this important? Because there's a human being on the other end of it. That is really the heart of why this is important. And when you add to the fact of how stressful the interview process is, how difficult it can be, it really leaves it like, I don't understand recruiters, hiring managers, etc., that don't consider this. I find it to be really disrespectful, actually, the way a lot of people have expectations of candidates, of job seekers. And this comes from the fact that from the power dynamic that's historically existed between companies and individuals.
Yeah.
And so companies having all of the power historically were able to act however they want. You want a job, you're lucky to have a job, you're lucky to work for us. You'll go through the 7 interviews that we want. You'll go through the 12-person panel that we want because you want the job. And then over time, thankfully over the years, things evolved where it was more of a recognition that, you know what, this isn't just we're trying to find out information about the candidate, but this is also the candidates trying to find out information about us. And that's one of the reasons why, to start from the business perspective, why you need to care about candidate experience. Because they're gathering perceptions of you based on your hiring process. Mm-hmm. And the reality is, well, unfortunately, during COVID times, and these things are obviously different, but, for the last few years, at least in North America, being in a full job market, there were a lot of companies who were making offers to candidates that were getting denied. I spoke to a lot of organizations, especially in the GTA, that were facing a lot higher rates of denials of offers.
Why?
of denials of offers, that because they would get an offer somewhere else, a candidate would get 2-3 offers at the same time, so then it's more likely for them to deny it, right? That's
The employer was denying the
no,
offer?
the candidate was denying the
Yeah, yeah,
employers
yeah.
because
Before COVID.
before COVID. And
Yeah.
so when you have those kind of options, and great candidates do have those kind of options,
Definitely.
they're going to judge you based on your candidate experience. Like Gurpreet said, are you being flexible? Much like Gurpreet, I've conducted many interviews before or after hours. Because you know what? Reality is that life is the way it is. People can't always do these things at the time that's convenient necessarily just for the hiring manager, just for the recruiter. Sometimes people have jobs where, you know what, if you even look a little bit out of place between 9 to 5, people are going to start to question you. And it's actually a funny story, though, about the dress. The way that actually started was one day at my job, I had actually dressed in a suit for an event I was going to after work. And all of my friends at work were teasing me. They're like, oh, no, are you going for an interview? Are you going for an interview? And that's when I realized, I'm like, oh, so in a normal, if you're normally dressed a certain way, and normally at that job, I'd be dressed in a sweater and dress pants. And if I dressed up, people started to think I was going for an interview.
But it's the norm.
It's exactly. And so from then on, nobody even ever mentioned it. But if I knew that the person who was interviewing has a job already, I always offered that information and said, for our dress code, we want you to dress as you would for a normal day at work. That's what I said. They didn't even ever have to bring it up to me because I always said it to them. And every time they were surprised and said nobody's ever told them that before. Nobody's ever shared that expectation with them.
Yeah, no one normally wouldn't share that information because we expect candidates to dress the part, right? And there are little gimmicks you can do, even if you're employed. You know, you don't have to fully dress up that way to work, but you can still keep a jacket in your car and turn. Mine was a little bit of a
playing games. I'm sorry, but that is just playing games. That is, and I respect candidates that do that. Don't get me wrong. I appreciate and respect the candidates. They have a game they have to play, and I don't question that at all. But what I'm saying as employers, if we treat the candidates better, like they're humans, especially job seekers in this particular market, they deserve a lot more respect and appreciation because of how difficult things are for them right now. And if all of us just took a moment to remember what it was like to be a job seeker, right? To find out information.
That's what we always forget, that we forget that we were once them, or we will be with them sooner or later, right? Like it shouldn't be, and I call it making candidates jump through hoops. We shouldn't make candidates jump through hoops. We should make our processes human. Maybe the dress code to being flexible, meeting candidates all times, you know, especially for candidates working. I sympathize. I would never come early. Or actually, I've accommodated candidates. I've done videos, you know, save you time. Let's hop on Zoom. Let's do a video. Like, it doesn't even have to be Zoom. Do you have WhatsApp? Do you have Google? Or if I had an like whatever phone I had, if it's iPhone, do you have, you know, FaceTime to save the candidate time, right? But if it's like obviously meeting with the different managers and stuff, I've been fortunate enough. A lot of the managers I've worked with were flexible. There's one element that I think was common in a lot of the managers was, I want to see if the candidate brings a copy of the resume. I'm like, why? Because they need to come prepared. So this is my test. It was like the little testing tool. I'm like, here's a copy. You don't need to test the candidate, right? The candidate has submitted the resume. Why? Why do we need to bring a copy, right? Why do we need to test the candidate? That testing is where I think a lot of people get stuck, and I think they need to put the candidates through those, I call it the jumping the hoop, right? Whoever jumps the hoops the most, let's hire that candidate. That's not how it should be. We shouldn't be making candidates jump through hoops, but we should focus on, I say, hey, would you make the customer jump through hoops to buy your product or buy your services? And if you said no, then why are we doing it with the candidates? Should be the same.
Because of perspective. That the reality is, the reason that this happens, from my experience in the companies that I've worked with, it has to do with their perspective on the power dynamic. Their perspective on what it means that the person is lucky to have a job, that the company is the job creator and the person is just the input into creating something for the job, as opposed to there being two entities on opposite sides of the table, one being the company, one being the human being, the candidate, the job seeker on the other side of it, who has their own desires, their own goals, their own requirements, and their own perspective. And smarter companies have recognized the value in that and in looking at that. But there are a lot of old school companies and a lot of old school leaders that believe that what the job or the talent acquisition process is that we have to find out if they're going to be good at the job, if they can meet my requirements, whatever those requirements are. I want to find out if they meet my requirements. And I don't care if I meet their requirements, because I'm the one in power. I show that I value that power by not caring about their side of the story. And so these candidates are then left jumping through hoops, trying to make people happy. The idea that a candidate won't be good because they didn't bring their resume. Here, look, I have it on my phone. I can text it to you, right? Like I can message it to you.
I used to take, when I was a job candidate, I used to take my iPad with me.
And so
it's like, you don't have it here. Use my iPad.
And for me, that's crazy, because most of the people that I've worked with, both of us would print the candidate's resume, and a lot of candidates would bring their resume, and I wouldn't care. Good for them. Bad. It's like, okay, that's fine. That's just the game they have to play, right? And the idea that somebody isn't going to be good. So we've touched on a couple of areas so far.
You know what I say about resumes to people is, if you go to the interview and they don't have a copy of your resume and they expect you to bring it, that's a red flag, and you don't want to work for that company. Because
they're not prepared.
Yeah, they're not prepared. It's me as an HR professional. This is part of my job. Like they've done their part. They've gone in they submitted the resume. The only reason you're inviting them for the interview is because you've seen their resume. You want to get to know them more. How hard it is to print? It's 2 seconds. 2 seconds. How hard it is to have it on your phone and to go through it. Like, how hard is it? I never understood.
I like that one. Sorry to interrupt, but I like that one better, because then you don't have to waste trees or ink, but for doing it. Because I don't even think they should have to print the resume, because, and you shouldn't have to even print the resume. You have it electronically. You have a copy of it.
Well, I like to print it just because
taking notes, I'm sure.
No, I have a note thing separate, but it's more of just, actually I print it and read it, and then I make notes. Like, I make notes on the resume to what I want to ask. Here's some, like, I thought it was really great, so I circle it, highlight it, make sure I ask them about this, right? It's more for my prep. And speaking of prep, I've heard horror stories from candidates who've gone to interviews, and the interviewer, whoever it was, be it HR, recruiter, or hiring managers, didn't have their resume, didn't know who the candidate was. One even interviewed them for the wrong role. So these are all disaster stories. Not prepping, not knowing anything about the candidate, don't even know, like, no background, and don't even know why the candidate's there or had an interview. One candidate told me, I think it was last year, I think this candidate went on an interview and sat in the company waiting for an hour. And then someone came to them, and then the person who even interviewed them had no knowledge about this person or the role they were being interviewed for. So it was a total disaster. And hence why, as you said, power, right? So a lot of companies power tripping. I don't even think it's companies. I think it's also the individual involved in the hiring process on power tripping. We shouldn't be power tripping. It's also called employer brand building. Your candidates that are coming in, You are supposed to set the tone of who you are, what your company is, what you represent, and how you make a guest feel in your company. This is a guest coming into your house. What would you do when someone comes to your house? You offer them water, drink, X, Y, and Z. So that's my philosophy. If you're coming to my house, I'm going to offer you food and drinks. So same thing with the candidate. One of my clients used to have snacks and all stuff. Offer to the candidate. When they come in, make them sit in the lobby. Front desk job was to ask them for coffee, tea. Do you want some snacks? Give them a list of all the snacks you have. Let them pick and choose. Experience, right? Also, candidates are scared, nervous. It kind of a little bit helps them to drink water. Helps if now I remember having a candidate came early in the morning for interview A, and she's like, "Yeah, I need coffee." I'm like, "No problem." Ask the receptionist to get her coffee, right? So just what it helps them to a little bit relax too, and you can have a little bit, fun conversation. And then when you bring them in, still have water, make them feel comfortable and have the room prepared. I've seen people not even prepared for interviews where you're just throwing them some I seen some people interviewing hallways. I'm like, why? We don't have space. How is that the candidate's problem? Then why did you interview the candidate in if you don't have all the rooms are booked out? Why should the candidate be interviewed in the lobby or in the hallway?
So I want to touch on a couple of points that you've hit on, I think that are really important, which is one is around prep. That be prepared, be ready for the person. The person deserves that respect, that you are ready for them, that you know who they are, that they're coming, why they're coming, there's a place for them to go. All of these things need to be ready. And you tied it to a really important point, which is that candidates are uneasy. It's a stressful situation. Mm-hmm. Your lack of prep adds to their lack of ease. Because when you're uncertain, you set the tone and it makes them uncertain. Whereas the responsibility, in getting back to the whole interviewer experience, is that it's the interviewer's responsibility to set the tone. To set the tone from the beginning of the conversation. This is what the conversation is going to be like. Whatever that style is, whatever that tone is, the candidate doesn't know. And as long as you leave them in ambiguity, you'll leave them in a stressful state and less likely to be able to answer questions effectively. You want them at their best. You don't want them at their worst. You don't want them at their most scared. You want them at their best. And one thing I also want to add in terms of prep is communication. Communication between people who are doing interviewing. Because I can't count how many times I've talked to candidates who have to answer the same question for every interviewer. And that question is already answered on your resume anyway. So how many times do you really have to answer, what do you consider my strengths? What were you doing at your last role? How many times do you have to answer that? It should be once. If you're
I don't understand why someone needs to, what were you doing in your last role? Because it's written on their resume what they were doing. Why not ask a smarter question, go through their resume? What I do is I read the resume. I highlight things that I want to talk on or touch on and get them to explain or explain further, because maybe the resume is a little bit vague. But to ask somebody, what did you do in this? Tell me what you were doing in your last role. It's right there in your resume, right? These are also wasting time, candidates' time.
And managers' time. Managers' time. Because imagine if you ask a question that takes the candidate 5 minutes to answer 3 times. So instead of having a brief conversation and a debrief about that between interviews and making sure everybody's on the same page or finding some sort of common, document or whatever it is that you share, each person's asking it over and over again. What message does that tell to the candidate? And I want to then go further on that of what message are you giving the candidate with your decisions? Because the candidate is going to interpret things how they want to, not how you want to. So I've heard a lot of examples, especially in sales roles, where salespeople have to do projects for their companies, for these companies. So they'll have a full-time job and they're expected to do hours and hours of work for some other company for a job that's not guaranteed to them, that the company won't pay them for. I spoke to one person, they wanted a month worth of work.
No, I had a company that wanted 6 months. And I said no. Yeah. So it's not just sales. I've seen it in throughout other, this was HR role, 6 months a plan. And I said no. Why? Why am I putting 6 months plan? First, I spent an hour and a half talking to the CEO. And I actually even, this is me, I did a presentation because I knew that's just me going an extra mile. I already did an extra mile and I showed you a presentation of, I forgot what it was, like how I can, this is the areas, your pain points, here's what I've done research and here's where you can improve and how to take your company. So wasn't really a startup, but they were a growing startup and how we can grow and all that stuff. So I've already done all that work. Why am I now so the homework it was through a recruitment agency. And then they came back to recruiters saying to put the 6 month plan together. I go, I'm not doing it. Why should I put a 6 month plan together? What am I gonna accomplish in 6 months? Why am I doing this? And I've had this, I've heard this multiple times. And last year, there was a company out there that is a third party. And I was at the client's site, and this individual came to sell to my client on hiring their company to assess candidates. And one of the things that they did was this project homework. And I said, excuse me, hold up, why? Because this is a way to assess the candidate. I go, no, this is the worst philosophy I've ever heard, is to make candidates do all this work. Why? Who's paying them? Who's paying them? And then companies use all this knowledge. You may not hire the candidate, but you may have liked something in their presentation. You're going to steal it now. You're going to use it and give it to the candidate you hired. Hey, this person had this idea. Let's incorporate it, right? So why are candidates giving out free information?
Power dynamic. It goes back to it. It goes back to that power dynamic that the company expects the people to give everything and to put all of their cards on the table and spend a month working for a company for free just for the opportunity to work there. And it's extremely disrespectful. So I'm looking at some of these comments here. So Gaurav said, I was in a cafeteria.
Yeah, that's really bad.
Like that just shows that,
unless they offered you lunch.
Maybe.
Interview.
I guess with a free lunch, I guess I can't complain about that. Melanie makes a great point here about that. Some candidates forget that the candidates are assessing them. And that's exactly the point, because they feel like they're in a position of they'll just get whoever they want. They forget that the candidates have every right to assess and to judge, and are doing that based on your behaviors, based on, did I get asked the same question by 4 people? Were people ready for me? No, Gaurav.
No, he said no.
But Melanie makes a great point about this, that it's so important to respect that it's not just a one-sided thing. There's 2 sides to this. There's 2 parties who are trying to figure each other out. Is this the place for me to work? Is it going to make me comfortable? Because if you treat a person badly through the candidate experience, even if they accept the role, what kind of precedent does that set? What kind of expectations do they have of the company? What kind of beliefs do they have about the company? That if the company abused me for free for a month, what are they going to do for me once I'm an employee? It doesn't set it up for success. But again, a lot of companies do these kind of things.
But it is a two-way street. Candidates also need to get smarter. I've seen candidates not see it as a two-way street, and then those candidates get stuck in toxic work environments. Guys, if you're a candidate, you gotta see the interview as a two-way street, and this should be your time to identify red flags. If the company expects you to jump through hoops, red flag. If the company wants you to do extra work, red flag. If company is interviewing in the cafeteria, no lunch, red flag. I think it's a red flag. I don't know what the circumstances was for them to have the interview. Maybe last minute there could be been a problem. I don't know. Worst thing is when different people jump into during interview at a different intervals. I don't know how that is the worst thing. I need more context because it could be a panel interview and people can jump into in through different phases of the interview, and the interview process may have been made like that. I don't know. But I want to go back to something you said, Gil, making candidates like interviewing 5-6 hours or all 7 interviews, right? I found a lot of Fortune 500 companies, larger the organization, the ridiculous long recruitment process they have, where almost the candidate spending 5+ hours, sometimes like 5+ hours a day, and they're meeting like 5 to 10 different people. And my sister's gone through this a couple of times. Like, I know people who've gone through this. I fortunately haven't gone through this, but I know people who've gone through this. And the feedback was that they didn't like it, but then they kind of liked it. But the thing was, a lot of the times these individuals were asking the same questions. So why not get them in one room and ask it once?
Well, see, or ask it once and not necessarily the same room, because, you know, I wanted to talk about panel interviews, because panel interviews in my mind are good up to a certain number. Because I've heard of horror stories of 10, 12 plus people sitting in a panel, which then becomes so intimidating to the individual, it makes it really hard to answer. If you have a panel of 2 or 3 people, I think that's a great idea, because you can validate with each other about what you think you heard. Everybody brings their own biases, and it ensures that everybody's on the same page. But the idea, I don't understand the idea of 7 different interviews. What are you finding out in the 7th hour that you didn't find out in the first 2 hours? This is what I don't understand. What do you find out by having them meet with all of these different people that adds value to your decision, that adds value to your capability to determine whether or not they will be good for the role? I don't get that. I don't see what those 7 hours do. They want them to meet people, get to know people. Well, you know what that does? That just introduces more bias. That's just, does this individual get along with them? Do you want to have a beer with them? Well, that's crap. That's a horrible way to hire people. It's a horrible way to interview. And that's how we have these problems in so many organizations in terms of the systems, in terms of racism, in terms of bias, because we allow managers to hire based on, well, did I like the person? Did I get along with them? Were they easy to talk to? I don't care if they were easy to talk to. Can they get the job done? That's what really matters. But a lot of times they introduce, well, I want them to meet different members of the team. Well, that's just adding bias times bias. It doesn't help things when you're not all looking for the same things. You have to know what you're looking for beforehand before you start sending a person on all of these interviews.
I think,
yes, Mohammed, I agree 100%.
I think employers need to exposure
On
how to yeah. I think it comes down to having strong HR professionals on the team where you can call out, like, you should be able to build these processes and eliminate all the bad ones. So I think it requires a strong HR to do this. Panel interviews, back to panel interviews. I've done panel interviews, but I think you need to assess the role. I don't think you can use them for all levels. You can, depending on if it's 1 or 2, 2 or 3. I've done a panel interview where we had more than 5 people, but it was to save the candidate time. It was a senior level role that was going to impact all the departments. So we had all the heads in the interview, but we made it. We didn't have it like us versus the candidate. We were all just sitting all together and having a discussion. Like, here's our pain points. Here's where we're struggling. So it was actually a discussion about the role, because it was a manufacturing was really struggling in the warehouse. So, but it was impacting the departments. So the idea behind that, which was my idea, I'm not saying it was the perfect idea, but to have candidates come in, instead of making them go through 4 different rounds of interviews, we did it one shot. But we had, I think there was 5 of us, and it was just everybody, like the CEO just talked about the pain points, and then each department kind of just give their pain points of how it's impacting their department because the warehouse is a mess. And then we just let the candidate kind of go through, it was a discussion. And then we took the candidate, one person took the candidate out for a tour of the plant to show them like the mess the warehouse was in. And that was it.
But see, the thing is, because we're just at 1 o'clock now, but before we wrap up here, I do want to point out that there was an understanding and awareness there that is not just about panel interview, no panel interview. It's about how you do it. Because sure, somebody could look up best practices and say, oh, the best number for a panel interview is X, right? But it's not the point. Because what you did there with that team, instead of the traditional interview, which is the person gets peppered with questions, everybody on one side of the table, they're on the other side of the table, you might as well have a big spotlight on them, and you keep on asking them questions, and in their mind is racing from place to place. Whereas if you have one group conversation where they articulate their issues and have a conversation about it, that's a very different way of doing it, and a lot more respectful of the individual, because it respects the fact that we tighten up. Sitting across from a big group of people, it makes it hard. It makes it a difficult thing. And so I want to tie that all back to...
We made it like it was a board meeting. We
Absolutely.
all, like, we weren't I told everybody, like, no, we can't sit like it's us against the person. We're gonna all sit around, and wherever the candidate wants, it's their choice. But it's gonna be facilitated like we're in a meeting and we're discussing about the problems. And then the individual being the expert in the warehouse, it was a senior level role that was going to work with the CEO and all the other heads of the other departments. So it's like a head position. We needed somebody so badly. And I said, why are we going to waste time and create layers of rounds of interviews when I can do the pre-screening and then just shortlist candidates, and then we just do one shot of in-person interview, and you guys can all talk about the pain points your departments are facing because the warehouse is in the mess. Because it wasn't that the other departments weren't being impacted, they were. So then we did like a facilitation of the problems we're suffering of not having a strong warehouse head.
So for my last thing, just to wrap it up, I just want to say that the way you find out these things, how your interview process is really internalized, is through feedback. If you don't know what your interviews are like from a candidate's perspective, ask people inside the company, ask recent hires, ask them and try to give them an environment where they can be psychologically safe to share. But talk to people and understand, what is it about the interview process that's good about your company? What is it about it that's bad? Because that's the only way you'll actually be able to intentionally control your employer brand. Otherwise, these things are impacting your employer brand and you have no idea. You could have negative impacts because of the way you interview and you have no idea. So the last thing I just would leave you all with is just that, check that out, talk to people, find out what the interview process is like from the other side of the table, and fix some of the pain points, because that will help get you a lot further with candidates.
Okay, perfect, Gail. And my ending remarks is just very simple. Put yourself in the candidate's shoe. Never forget that you were once a candidate and you can be a candidate again. You got to design the candidate experience during the interview processes just like how you would want to be treated like a candidate. So let's not forget that we were a candidate and we can easily be a candidate again. So let's design the candidate experience during the interview processes from a human level, because in the end of the day, we are human. So on that note, we are going to end our segment. We will be back on Thursday with a guest.
Yes.
Who is our guest, Gil?
It's your guest, lawyer.
A lawyer. Okay. We will confirm the guest. It's supposed to be an employment lawyer coming on to our show on Thursday. We will confirm 100% once I have 100% confirmation from the employment lawyer to discuss, always because it's COVID and there's so many laws being implemented, and how to navigate through the COVID and all the laws that are being implemented as businesses are reopening. So we will be back on Thursday, same time, 12:30. And until then, enjoy your rest of your day, and we will see you guys on Thursday. Bye.
Thanks all.